Council today dealing with a full agenda, including an item that would establish higher code standards for building in a floodplain. Brian Burns was covering City Hall for us today. He has an update now on how those new standards, if they are approved, would impact the city. Brian?
Well, Joe, increasing the standards will hopefully do two things: save lives and decrease some insurance costs. The new standards would apply to all new construction and require, for example, that all new construction would have to be elevated 1 foot above what they call base flood elevation. That would depend on where the structure would be located based on the latest floodplain maps, which are available on the city's website. Nina Nixon Mendez, director of the city's Development Services Department, says the new standards would not affect buildings and homes already there, but could affect reconstruction after any disaster.
In terms of fire, natural disaster, that kind of thing, then at that point, if it were 50% of the value of the improvements of the property were impacted, in other words, to reconstruct greater than that, then that would also apply.
Now, if the city adopts the higher standards, then it could save taxpayers more than $1.5 million in insurance premiums by moving our area from a 7 to a 6 classification, which means a 20% discount. Now, following council approval, if in fact they do approve it, a public hearing on the higher standards will be set. Joe, Mackenzie?
Brian, thank you.